I was standing in the middle of the ballroom at the Drake Hotel in Chicago, holding a glass of champagne that cost more than my first car when my daughter-in-law took the microphone. The room went silent. She looked like a princess in her $20,000 Vera Wang dress, glowing under the crystal chandeliers. I smiled, waiting for the usual thank you to the families. Instead, she pointed a manicured finger directly at me. "And this, everyone, is my father-in-law, Bernard. Please excuse the smell. He is the old fat pig we have to put up with." The entire room of 300 guests erupted in laughter. My own son, the groom, didn't stand up. He didn't defend me. He just looked down at his shoes and chuckled nervously. They thought I was just a broke retired mechanic from Detroit. They had no idea that I had just bought the company her father worked for that very morning. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been underestimated by people who judged a book by its cover. My name is Bernard Kowalski, but my friends call me Bernie. I am 67 years old, and I have spent the last 40 years of my life with grease under my fingernails and diesel fumes in my lungs. To look at me, you would see a man who shops at Walmart, drives a 10-year-old Ford F-150, and struggles to button his suit jacket over a belly built on diner food and long shifts. That is exactly what I want you to see. It is the perfect camouflage. What you do not see is the man the Wall Street Journal calls the butcher. You do not see the founder of Kowalski Logistics, a supply chain empire that moves everything from automotive parts to medical supplies across 48 states. You do not see the man who specializes in buying failing companies, stripping them of their dead weight, and turning them into gold mines. I do not wear my wealth. I do not drive it. I keep it in the bank, compounding, waiting for moments like this. I arrived at the wedding 10 minutes late. It was not because I am disorganized. It was because one of my refrigerated trucks had broken down outside of Gary, Indiana, with a load of insulin, and I had to personally route a replacement fleet. I did not have time to shower. I changed into my suit in the back of my truck. There was a smear of black axle grease on my left cuff. I tried to rub it out with spit, but it just made a dark smudge against the cheap gray polyester. I walked into the ballroom, feeling the eyes of the bride's family on me. The Van Dorts. They stood in a receiving line near the entrance, looking like a royal family greeting their subjects. Richard Van Dort, the father of the bride, was wearing a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin. His wife Cynthia was dripping in diamonds that I suspected were rented. When I approached them, Richard wrinkled his nose. He sniffed the air theatrically. "Bernie," he said, his voice loud enough to carry over the string quartet. "Did you get lost on the way to the Jiffy Lube? This is a black tie event, not a tailgate party." Cynthia fanned herself with a program. "Richard, be nice. Maybe he does not have a washing machine at that trailer park he lives in." They both laughed. A cruel, sharp sound. I did not live in a trailer park. I lived in the same 3-bedroom ranch house in the suburbs of Detroit that I bought with my late wife Martha 30 years ago. I kept it because it still smelled like her perfume in the hallway closet. I kept it because it was home. I swallowed my pride. I did it for Jason, my son, my only child. Jason was standing a few feet away, adjusting his bow tie in a mirror. He saw the interaction. He saw his father being humiliated by his new in-laws. He did nothing. He turned his back and pretended to be fascinated by the ice sculpture of a swan. That hurt more than the insults. I had paid for Jason's college. I had pulled strings to get him his mid-level management job at a logistics firm that, unbeknownst to him, was a subsidiary of my corporation. I had signed a check for $85,000 just 4 hours ago to pay for this wedding because Brittany, his bride, said it was her dream to get married at the Drake. $85,000. And I was being treated like a stain on the carpet. I found a corner and tried to make myself invisible. I watched the servers passing around hors d'oeuvres that looked like art projects. I watched Brittany floating around the room accepting compliments, flashing the 3-carat diamond ring that I had secretly paid for when Jason's credit card was declined at the jeweler. She looked beautiful, and she looked cold. Her eyes were constantly scanning the room, checking who was watching her, calculating the net worth of every handshake. She was 26 years old and hungry for a life she had not earned. Then came the speeches. The best man told a drunken story about a college road trip. The maid of honor cried about how Brittany was her soulmate. Then Brittany took the microphone. She stood center stage, bathed in a spotlight. She thanked her parents, calling them her rocks, her inspiration, the epitome of class. Then she turned those cold blue eyes toward my dark corner. "And we cannot forget Jason's father, Bernard," she said. The spotlight swung around and blinded me. I blinked, shielding my eyes. "There he is. Please excuse the smell, everyone. He works with cars or garbage trucks or something. I honestly stop listening when he talks about his day." There were a few nervous giggles, but she did not stop. She pointed at the grease stain on my cuff. "Look at that suit. It is bursting at the seams. This is the old fat pig we have to put up with. We tried to get him to buy a new suit, but I guess you cannot put lipstick on a pig, right?" The room exploded. It was not polite laughter. It was roaring, raucous laughter. It was the sound of 300 people relieved that they were not the target. I stood there frozen. My hand went to my chest pocket. Inside, resting against my heart, was an envelope. In that envelope was a cashier's check for $500,000. It was my wedding gift to them. A down payment on a house so they wouldn't have to rent anymore. I looked at Jason. He was laughing too. He was shaking his head, red-faced, laughing along with his wife to keep the peace, to keep her happy. At my expense. My hand tightened around the envelope inside my pocket. I felt the thick, expensive paper crinkle. With a slow, deliberate motion, I tore the check in half inside my pocket. Then I tore it again, and again, until it was just confetti. Richard Van Dort walked over to me as the spotlight moved away. He was wiping tears of laughter from his eyes. "Oh, Bernie, that was priceless," he said, slapping me on the back hard enough to sting. "Don't take it personally. Brittany just has a very sophisticated sense of humor." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a $20 bill. "Here, go buy yourself some stain remover, or maybe a salad." He tucked the bill into the breast pocket of my jacket, right next to the shredded remains of $500,000. I looked at the $20. Then I looked at Richard. He was glowing with arrogance. He leaned in close, his breath smelling of expensive scotch. "You know, Bernie, you should enjoy this food. It is probably the best meal you will eat all year. I am celebrating tonight. Big news. The board of directors at Sterling Industries is finally going to announce the new CEO on Monday. And you are looking at him. I am going to be the most powerful man in Chicago. I could buy and sell your little garage 1,000 times over." I felt a strange calmness wash over me. It was the same feeling I got right before I walked into a boardroom to dismantle a company. It was the calm of a predator who knows the prey has already stepped into the trap. Sterling Industries. That was the name of the company I had spent the last 3 months auditing in secret. That was the company whose acquisition papers I had signed at 6 a.m. that morning. Richard Van Dort wasn't going to be the CEO. He was a regional vice president who had been cooking the books to hide a $1.5 million deficit in his department. And I was his new boss. I didn't say a word. I didn't throw the drink in his face. I didn't scream. I just nodded. "Congratulations, Richard," I said. "I am sure Monday will be a day you never forget." He laughed and walked away to refill his drink. I started to make my way toward the head table, the VIP table where the parents were supposed to sit. I just wanted to sit down, eat my dinner, and leave. Brittany intercepted me before I could pull out a chair. "Whoa, hold on, Bernie," she said, blocking my path. Where do you think you are going? I pointed to the empty seat next to Jason. That is my seat, isn't it? She scoffed. Absolutely not. That seat is for my uncle from the Hamptons. He is an investment banker. He is a very important man. We need to network tonight. She grabbed my arm, her nails digging into the cheap fabric of my jacket. She spun me around and pointed toward the back of the room near the swinging double doors of the kitchen. Your table is over there. Table 19. It is better for everyone. You will be more comfortable with people your own speed. And honestly, I don't want you in the background of the official photos. You clash with the aesthetic. I looked at table 19. It was tucked in a dark corner right next to the service entrance. Every time the kitchen doors swung open, a blast of steam and the smell of dishwater washed over the table. The other guests at the table were the photographer's assistant, the DJ's girlfriend, and two cousins they clearly didn't want to invite. It was the table for the outcasts, the table for the embarrassments. Jason, I said, looking over Brittany's shoulder at my son. Is this what you want? Jason looked up from his plate. He looked at his wife, then at me. He shrugged. Mom is right, Dad. I mean, Brittany is right. It is just for dinner. Do not make a scene. You know how you get when you are around fancy people. You get loud. Just sit at the back. It is fine. Whatever piece of my heart had not been shredded along with that check just turned to ice. I looked at my son. I saw the boy I had taught to ride a bike, the boy I had held when he cried over his first breakup, the boy I had worked double shifts for so he never had to wear second-hand clothes like I did. And I realized that boy was gone. He was just a weak man in a tuxedo afraid of his wife. I understand, I said. I will go to my table. I walked to the back of the room. The waiter bumped into me with a tray of dirty dishes as I sat down. The chair was wobbly. The tablecloth had a wine stain on it that hadn't been washed out. I sat there for 10 minutes watching the head table. I watched Richard Van Dort laughing, pouring wine that I paid for. I watched Brittany preening for the cameras. I watched Jason shrinking into his chair. I felt the vibration of my phone in my pocket. It was an email alert from my bank. A notification of the $85,000 charge for the wedding clearing my account. The Platinum package. It included the venue, the 4-course meal, and the premium open bar. Unlimited top-shelf liquor for 300 guests. I stood up. I adjusted my jacket. I walked past table 19, past the dance floor, and out into the lobby. I found the event manager, a frazzled-looking woman named Sarah, who was organizing seating charts. Excuse me, I said. She looked up, scanning my cheap suit. The restrooms are down the hall, sir. I am not looking for the restroom, I said. I am the one paying for this event. Bernard Kowalski. Her face changed instantly. Oh, Mr. Kowalski, I am so sorry. Is everything to your liking? Is the food satisfactory? I reached into my wallet. It was a Velcro wallet I bought at a gas station 5 years ago. I heard the Velcro rip open. It was a sound that usually made people sneer. But from inside that wallet, I pulled out a card. It wasn't a debit card. It wasn't a standard credit card. It was a piece of anodized titanium, heavy, black. The American Express Centurion card. The black card. Sarah's eyes went wide. She knew what that card meant. It meant there was no limit. It meant I could buy the hotel if I wanted to. I want to make a change to the service contract. I said, my voice calm and steady. Sarah pulled up the file on her tablet. Of course, sir. What do you need? More champagne. A late-night snack bar. No, I said. I want you to cancel the open bar. Immediately. As of this second, this is a cash bar. Sarah blinked. Sir, the open bar is the main feature of the Platinum package. The guests have been drinking Grey Goose and Macallan all night. If we switch to cash now— I want it switched, I interrupted. And I want the prices set to the hotel's standard maximum rate. $25 for a cocktail, $15 for a beer. And I want you to instruct your bartenders to collect payment for every drink served from this moment forward. No exceptions. Not for the bride. Not for the father of the bride. No one. But Sir Sarah stammered. This will cause chaos. They are going to be furious. I looked her in the eye. I am paying the bill, Sarah. Is it my signature on the contract? She nodded. Then do it. Or I dispute the entire $85,000 charge right now. She swallowed hard. Yes, sir. I will radio the bar staff immediately. I put the black card back into my Velcro wallet and walked back into the ballroom. I didn't go to table 19. I leaned against a pillar in the back, crossing my arms over my chest, covering the grease stain. I waited. It took exactly 4 minutes. I saw Richard Van Dort walk up to the bar. He slammed his hand on the counter and shouted, "Another scotch! Make it a double!" The bartender, a young guy who looked terrified, poured the drink. Then he set it on the counter and held out his hand. "That will be $40, sir." Richard froze. He laughed. "What are you talking about? It is an open bar. Do you know who I am? I am the father of the bride." "I am sorry, sir," the bartender said loud enough for the people nearby to hear. "The host has changed the contract. The open bar is closed. It is cash only from now on." Richard's face turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. "What host? I am the host. This is my daughter's wedding." "Actually," the bartender said, checking a slip of paper. "The host is listed as a Mr. Bernard Kowalski. He just cut off the tab." Richard spun around. He scanned the room, his eyes wild. He saw me standing by the pillar. I raised my hand and gave him a little wave. Then I pointed to my pocket, miming the motion of putting money in. The whisper started at the bar and spread through the room like a wildfire. "The free booze is gone. You have to pay. $20 for a beer." Brittany was on the dance floor when her maid of honor ran up and whispered in her ear. Brittany stopped dancing. She looked at the bar where a line of angry guests was already forming, wallets being pulled out reluctantly. She looked at Richard, who was screaming at the bartender. Then she looked at Miso. Her face twisted into a mask of pure rage. She hiked up her dress and stormed across the dance floor toward me. The music seemed to fade away. The laughter died. She stopped inches from my face. "You," she hissed. "What do you think you are doing? You are ruining my wedding." I looked at her. I looked at the expensive dress I paid for, the flowers I paid for, the food I paid for. "I didn't ruin your wedding, Brittany," I said. "I just adjusted the budget. Pigs are notoriously cheap, didn't you know?" She gasped. "How dare you? Fix this. Fix this right now, or I swear to God, Jason will never speak to you again." Jason appeared at her elbow. He looked terrified. "Dad, please. Just turn it back on. You are embarrassing us. Everyone is looking." They were looking. 300 people were watching the old fat pig in the dirty suit stand his ground. "I am not embarrassing you, Jason," I said. "You embarrassed yourself when you let your wife call me a pig on a microphone. You embarrassed yourself when you put me by the toilet. You want free drinks? Buy them yourself. You have a job. Oh wait, I forgot. I got you that job, and I pay your rent. Maybe you should save your money." Richard Van Dort came charging up, his face sweaty. "Listen to me, you miserable little mechanic," he shouted, poking a finger into my chest. "You turn that tap back on, or I will destroy you. I will make one phone call and have your little shop condemned. Do you hear me? I am a powerful man." I looked at his finger on my chest. I looked at his red, sweaty face. I thought about the $1.5 million he stole from the pension fund. I thought about the audit report sitting on my desk at home. "Go ahead, Richard," I said softly. Make your call, but make sure you have enough credit on your phone plan. I hear unemployment benefits don't pay much these days." He frowned, confusion clouding his anger. "What are you talking about?" "You'll find out," I said. I pushed past them. I walked through the crowd. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. I walked out the front door of the Drake Hotel into the cool Chicago night air. I climbed into my rusty Ford F-150. It smelled like oil and stale coffee. It smelled like hard work. I drove home alone, but I wasn't sad. I was energized. I took my phone out and dialed a number I had on speed dial. It rang once. Mr. Kowalski. It was Mr. Blackwood, my corporate attorney, a man who made sharks look like goldfish. It was 11 p.m. on a Saturday, but he answered on the first ring because I pay him enough to never sleep. "I hope I am not disturbing you, Arthur," I said. "Never, sir." "What do you need?" "I need you to prepare a file," I said. "First, I want a full forensic audit of Richard Van Dort's tenure at Sterling Industries ready for the board meeting on Monday morning. I want every penny he stole documented." "Consider it done," Blackwood said. I could hear the smile in his voice. "And Arthur?" "Yes, sir. Initiate the eviction protocols for the property on Elm Street. The one occupied by Jason Kowalski and Brittany Van Dort. It is a company asset, correct?" "Technically, yes, sir. It is owned by the holding company." "Good. Serve them the notice tomorrow morning." "Sunday. I want them out by noon." There was a pause. "Sir, that is your son." "I know who it is, Arthur. Just do it." I hung up the phone. I pulled into my driveway. The house was dark. It was quiet. I walked into the kitchen and made myself a bologna sandwich. I ate it standing over the sink. It was the best meal I had eaten all year. The war had started, and they had no idea they were fighting a tank with a water pistol. I walked out of the revolving doors of the Drake Hotel, and the silence of the Chicago night hit me like a physical weight. Behind me inside the ballroom, the chaos I had orchestrated was just beginning to simmer. I could hear the muffled bass of the music, but I knew the mood had shifted. The free ride was over. The flow of premium vodka had stopped, and with it the illusion that my son's new family could drink my bank account dry without consequence. I did not wait for the valet. I never use valets. I do not like other men driving my truck. I walked across the street to the self-park garage where I had left my 10-year-old Ford F-150. It was a long walk, but I needed the cold air to clear the smell of expensive perfume and hypocrisy from my lungs. I had just reached the third level of the parking garage, my hand reaching for the door handle of my truck, when I heard the heavy metal door of the stairwell slam open. The sound echoed off the concrete walls like a gunshot. I did not turn around immediately. I knew who it was. The heavy, frantic footsteps gave him away. It was the sound of a man who was not used to running, a man who was used to snapping his fingers and having things brought to him. "Hey, you! Stop right there!" The voice was breathless and slurring slightly. It was Richard Van Dort. I turned slowly. He was standing under the fluorescent lights of the garage, his tuxedo jacket unbuttoned, his face a mask of red, sweaty fury. He looked out of place against the backdrop of parked cars and oil stains. He looked like a penguin lost in a mechanic's shop. He marched toward me, his patent leather shoes clicking angrily on the concrete. "You think you are funny, don't you?" Richard shouted, his voice echoing in the empty garage. "You think this is some kind of joke? Cutting off the bar. Do you have any idea who I have inside there? I have investors. I have partners. I have people who are going to decide my future on Monday morning, and you are making me look like a cheapskate." I leaned back against the bed of my truck. I crossed my arms over my chest. I looked him up and down. I didn't say a word. I learned a long time ago in business that silence is louder than screaming. If you let a foolish man talk long enough, he will eventually tell you everything you need to know to destroy him. And Richard was a very foolish man. He took my silence for stupidity. He stepped closer, invading my personal space. The smell of scotch was overpowering. "You are just a bitter, jealous little man, aren't you?" he spat. "You see people with class, people with money, people with a future, and you can't stand it. You want to drag us down into the mud with you. Well, I have news for you, Bernie. You cannot touch me. I am untouchable." I raised an eyebrow. "Untouchable?" I asked calmly. "That is a big word, Richard. Even the Titanic was unsinkable until it hit the ice." He laughed. A harsh barking sound. "Do not quote history to me, mechanic. You fix engines, I fix corporations. I move millions of dollars around before you even finish your morning coffee. Do you know what is happening on Monday? Do you? Of course you don't. You probably don't even read the business section." He was baiting me. He wanted to brag. He was desperate to prove his superiority to the man he had just called a pig. I decided to let him. I decided to give him the rope. "Enlighten me, Richard," I said. "What is happening on Monday?" He puffed out his chest. He looked around the empty garage as if he were addressing a board meeting. "Monday morning, I am taking control of Sterling Industries. The current CEO is out. He is weak. He is old. Just like you. The board has been looking for new blood. Someone aggressive. Someone who knows how to cut costs and drive revenue. And that is me. I am the regional vice president of North American sales right now, but as of 9 a.m. Monday, I am the man in charge." I felt a cold prickle on the back of my neck. Sterling Industries. The name hung in the air between us. It was the final confirmation. The final piece of the puzzle I hadn't realized was missing until this exact second. For the last 3 months, my team at Kowalski Logistics had been conducting a stealth due diligence on a failing manufacturing giant called Sterling Industries. We had been looking at their books, their assets, their liabilities. We had found a company that was bleeding cash. We had found a supply chain that was broken. And we had found a massive, unexplained discrepancy in the regional sales division. $1.5 million. That was the hole in the balance sheet. It had been hidden under vague consulting fees, inflated travel expenses, and vendor contracts that looked suspicious. My auditors had flagged it as potential embezzlement, but they hadn't put a name to it yet. They just had a title, Regional VP of North American Sales. I looked at Richard Van Dort. I looked at his $5,000 tuxedo. I looked at the Patek Philippe watch on his wrist that cost more than my truck. I thought about the house he lived in, which my background check said was leased. I thought about the wedding he hadn't paid a dime for. And suddenly the math worked. The $1.5 million wasn't lost. It was standing right in front of me, drunk and screaming in a parking garage. "So you are the genius behind the North American numbers," I said, keeping my voice flat. "I heard that division was having some cash flow issues." Richard froze for a second. His eyes narrowed. "Who told you that?" he demanded. Then he waved his hand dismissively. "It doesn't matter. You wouldn't understand high finance. Those are just accounting adjustments. Deferred revenue. It is complicated. It takes a certain level of intellect to understand how to move capital to maximize corporate leverage." He had almost said personal gain. He caught himself, but the slip was there. He was so arrogant he thought he could talk circles around me. He thought I was too simple to understand that deferred revenue didn't mean buying a boat you couldn't afford. "You are right, Richard," I said. "I am just a simple man. I just deal with nuts and bolts." "Exactly," he sneered. "You deal with nuts and bolts. I deal with the big picture. I am going to restructure that entire company. I am going to fire half the workforce. I am going to strip the pension fund. And I am going to walk away with a bonus that would buy your entire neighborhood. That is power, Bernie. That is what real men do. We take what we want." He was confessing. He was laying out his entire strategy for destroying the company I had just bought. He was telling me exactly why I had acquired Sterling Industries in the first place. I bought it to save it. I bought it because it had good bones and good workers, but it was being rotted from the inside by parasites like him. And now the head parasite was standing in front of me bragging about the infection. I felt a fire in my belly that I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't anger anymore. It was duty. It was the absolute certainty of what had to be done. But I couldn't show it yet. Not here. Not in the garage. The trap had to be sprung publicly. It had to be absolute. "You seem very confident, Richard," I said. "I hope Monday goes exactly as you expect." "It will," he said. "And you know what? Since I am going to be so rich, let me help you out." He reached into his pocket again. He pulled out a wad of cash. It was the same money clip I had seen earlier. He peeled off another $20 bill. He crumpled it into a ball and threw it at my face. It bounced off my cheek and landed on the dirty concrete floor. "There," he said. "Gas money. Take your rusty piece of junk truck and get out of here. Go back to Detroit. Do not come to my house. Do not call my daughter. You are an embarrassment to Jason. You are an embarrassment to this family. If I see you again, I will have security throw you out." He turned on his heel and began to walk away. He didn't look back. He assumed I would pick up the money. He assumed I would crawl away in shame. He assumed he had won. I watched him go. I watched him stagger slightly as he reached the door to the stairwell. I waited until the heavy metal door slammed shut behind him. Then and only then did I move. Ascend. I bent down. I picked up the crumpled $20 bill from the oil-stained floor. I smoothed it out against the hood of my truck. I folded it neatly and put it in my pocket. I would give it back to him. I would give it back to him on Monday morning. I unlocked my truck and climbed into the driver's seat. The leather was cracked and worn. The engine roared to life with a rumble that shook the frame. It was a solid sound, a real sound. I pulled out of the parking spot and drove toward the exit gate. I paid the parking fee with my own card. I didn't ask for a receipt. As soon as I was on the highway, heading away from the city lights and into the darkness of the interstate, I pulled out my phone. I hit the speed dial for Arthur Blackwood. He picked up immediately. "Mr. Kowalski," Blackwood said. His voice was crisp, alert. "I assume you have left the festivities." "I have," I said. "And Arthur, the scope of the audit has changed." "How so, sir?" "I just had a conversation with Richard Van Dort. He is under the impression that he is being promoted to CEO on Monday. He also alluded to the fact that the financial discrepancies in the North American division are his personal handiwork. He called them accounting adjustments for leverage." I could hear the sound of typing on the other end of the line. Blackwood was already working. "That is unfortunate for him, sir. It is going to be more than unfortunate, Arthur. I want you to wake up the entire forensic accounting team. I don't care what time it is. Pay them triple overtime. I want a complete reconstruction of every expense report, every vendor contract, and every wire transfer Richard Van Dort has authorized in the last 5 years. I want to know where the money went. I want to know if he has shell companies. I want to know if he is paying for his house, his car, and his daughter's wedding with company funds. We can do that, sir. It will take all night." "Good. I want the file on my desk at the Sterling Industries headquarters by 7 a.m. Monday." "And Arthur?" "Yes. Mr. Kowalski, I want you to draft a termination letter for cause, gross misconduct, embezzlement, breach of fiduciary duty, and I want you to contact the district attorney's office. See if we can get a fraud investigator on standby." "Sir, are you looking to have him arrested?" "I am looking to bury him, Arthur. He called me a pig. He threw money at me. He threatened to destroy my shop. I want to show him what a real butcher does. I want to strip him of everything. His job, his reputation, his freedom. I want him to walk out of that building in handcuffs. Understood, sir. The team is starting now. And one more thing, Arthur. Yes, the house that Jason and Brittany are living in. The one on Elm Street. Yes, sir. The eviction notice is prepared for tomorrow morning. Add a clause to the filing. I want an immediate inspection of the property for damages. If they have so much as scratched the paint, I want to sue them for the repairs. And cancel the lease on the Audi that Brittany drives. It is a company car leased through a subsidiary of Sterling, isn't it? I believe it is, sir. Richard arranged it as a perk for his daughter. Repo it. Tonight. I want her to wake up tomorrow morning with no house and no car. I want them to feel the floor drop out from under them. I want them to know that the pig has decided to roll in the mud. Consider it done, Mr. Kowalski. I hung up the phone. The highway stretched out before me, empty and dark. The headlights of my truck cut through the night. I wasn't tired. I wasn't hungry. I was focused. Richard Van Dort thought he was playing a game of status. He thought he was winning because he had a tuxedo and a title. He didn't realize he was playing a game of survival, and he had just poked the only animal in the forest that he should have run from. I turned up the radio. Classic rock. The Rolling Stones. I tapped my fingers on the steering wheel. I had 48 hours until the board meeting. 48 hours to prepare the slaughter. I drove into the night, the $20 bill burning a hole in my pocket, waiting for the sun to rise on my judgment day. I pulled my truck into the driveway of the only home I had known for 30 years. It was a modest brick ranch house in a neighborhood that real estate agents politely called up and coming, but everyone else just called old. The porch light was flickering. I made a mental note to fix it, then realized I probably wouldn't. I had bigger things to fix. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the smell of lemon polish and stale silence. My wife Martha had been gone for 5 years, but I still kept the house exactly the way she liked it. The doilies on the side tables, the ceramic roosters in the kitchen. It was a museum of a life that was simple, honest, and filled with love. A life Jason had grown up in, a life he now seemed desperate to erase. I walked into the kitchen and tossed my keys on the counter next to a stack of unopened mail. My hands were shaking, not from fear and not from the cold Chicago wind. They were shaking from the adrenaline of the confrontation in the garage. I washed the grease off my hands at the kitchen sink, scrubbing until my skin was raw and red. I looked at my reflection in the dark window above the sink. I saw an old man, a tired man, but I also saw the eyes of the man who had built an empire from a single tow truck. I sat down at the small kitchen table. It was the same table where I had helped Jason with his math homework, the same table where we ate birthday cakes and Thanksgiving dinners. I pulled out my phone. It was quiet. Too quiet. I expected Jason to call. I expected him to apologize. I expected him to say, "Dad, I am sorry. Brittany was out of line. I love you. I was a fool." The phone rang at midnight exactly. The screen lit up with Jason's name. I stared at it for a moment, a flicker of hope sparking in my chest. Maybe this was it. Maybe he had come to his senses. I swiped right and put the phone to my ear. "Jason," I said. It wasn't Jason. The voice that screamed through the speaker was shrill, slurred, and dripping with venom. It was Brittany. "You miserable old bastard!" she shrieked. I had to pull the phone away from my ear. The background noise was loud. Car horns, shouting. They were leaving the hotel. "Brittany," I said calmly, "put my son on the phone." "I will not put him on," she spat. "He is too upset to speak to you. You humiliated us. You humiliated me. Do you have any idea how much money we just had to put on credit cards to cover the bar tab? Do you? We maxed out everything. My father is furious. He says he is going to sue you for breach of verbal contract. I leaned back in my chair. Your father is going to be very busy on Monday, Brittany. I doubt he will have time for lawsuits. Don't you dare threaten my father, she screamed. He is 10 times the man you are. He has class. He has money. You are just a jealous, lonely old mechanic who couldn't stand seeing his son marry up. That is what this is, isn't it? You are jealous because Jason found a family that actually matters. The words hit me like physical blows. Marry up. As if my blood, the blood that ran through Jason's veins, was dirt. I am going to make this very clear to you, Bernard, she continued, her voice dropping to a hiss that was somehow louder than the screaming. You have made your choice. You chose your money over your family, so now you live with the consequences. I am pregnant. The world stopped. The kitchen, the flickering light, the smell of lemon. It all vanished. Pregnant. A grandchild. A piece of Martha. A piece of me. My hand tightened around the phone. You are pregnant, I whispered. Yes, she said. I was going to announce it during the toasts. But you ruined that too, and now I am making a promise to you. You will never see this child. You will never hold this baby. You will never know its name. My child will grow up knowing Richard Van Dort as his grandfather. My child will carry the Van Dort name. To my baby, you will be nothing. You will be a ghost, a dead fat pig that we do not talk about. The pain was blinding. It was worse than the insults. It was an amputation. She was cutting off my future. She was using an innocent life, my own flesh and blood, as a weapon to hurt me. Jason, I said, my voice cracking. Jason, are you there? Can you hear this? There was a shuffling sound, and then I heard my son's voice. It was weak. It was pathetic. I am here, Dad. Jason, she is saying, I can't see my grandchild. You can't let her do that. Jason sighed. It was a long, exasperated sound. Dad, honestly, what did you expect? You caused a scene. You hurt her feelings. You ruined her big night. She is emotional. She is hormonal. You brought this on yourself. I brought this on myself, I asked, my voice rising. I paid $85,000 for a party where I was insulted on a microphone. I was seated by the toilet. And when I defended myself, you stood there and watched. And now you are letting her use my grandchild as leverage. You are not listening, Dad, Jason shouted. For the first time, he sounded angry, but not at her, at me. You always have to be the victim. You always have to make it about you. Look, Brittany is my wife. She is my family now. You are just my dad. If she says you don't see the kid, then you don't see the kid. Maybe in a few years, if you apologize, if you make it right financially, we can talk. But right now, you are out. You are done. Make it right financially. There it was. The ransom note. If I paid up, if I groveled, if I opened the checkbook again, maybe I could buy a few minutes with my grandson. They were selling access to my own family. I closed my eyes. I pictured Jason as a toddler running into my arms. When I came home from the garage, grease on my clothes, smiling. I pictured him graduating high school, looking for me in the stands. I tried to find that boy in the voice on the phone, but he wasn't there. That boy was dead. He had been killed by greed and weakness. Okay, Jason, I said softly. I understand. Good, Jason said, sounding relieved. I am glad you finally get it. We are going to Brittany's parents' house tonight. Don't call us. We will call you when we are ready to accept your apology. The line went dead. I sat in the silence of my kitchen for a long time. The refrigerator hummed. The clock on the wall ticked. I looked at the photos on the fridge. Jason at camp. Jason at prom. I stood up and walked over to the fridge. I took the photos down one by one. I didn't rip them. I just put them face down on the table. Then I walked to my home office. It was a small room off the living room with a heavy oak desk and a secure laptop. I sat down and logged into my personal asset management system. I navigated to the folder labeled Real Estate Holdings, Personal. Inside was a file for 452 Elm Street. It was a beautiful Victorian house in the historic district. 4 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, a big backyard for a dog and a kid. I had bought it 3 years ago through a holding company called BMK Properties. I had told Jason that I knew the landlord and had pulled strings to get him a rent-to-own agreement with incredibly low payments. Payments that barely covered the property taxes. In reality, there was no landlord. I was the landlord. Jason and Brittany had been living in a $1 million home for $800 a month, thinking they were getting a deal, never knowing that their father was subsidizing their entire lifestyle. I had done it to give them a head start, to give them the stability I never had at their age. I looked at the lease agreement on the screen. It was a standard month-to-month contract. I had kept it flexible in case they ever wanted to move. But there was a clause. Clause 14b. The owner reserves the right to terminate the lease with 24 hours notice in the event of unauthorized alterations, subletting, or conduct detrimental to the property value, or simply because the owner was done being a doormat. I opened my email and drafted a message to Arthur Blackwood. Subject: Immediate eviction, 452 Elm Street. Arthur, change of plans. Do not wait until tomorrow morning. I want the eviction notice served tonight. Use the emergency courier service. I want it taped to their front door before they wake up. I am exercising the immediate termination clause. The property is to be vacated within 24 hours. Furthermore, I want you to freeze the bank account ending in 4490. That is the account I use to auto-deposit Jason's monthly allowance, which he thinks is a structured settlement from a car accident he never had. Cut it off. And Arthur, draft a cease and desist letter regarding the use of my name or likeness. If Brittany mentions me on social media, if she slanders me to her friends, I want to sue her for defamation. They want me to be a ghost, fine. I will be the ghost that haunts them. I hit send. I sat back in my chair. The anger was gone. It was replaced by a cold, hard clarity. They had threatened the one thing I had left to live for. My legacy. My grandchild. They thought they could use that child as a bargaining chip. They thought they could hold my love hostage. They didn't understand. You don't negotiate with terrorists. You eliminate their leverage. I pulled up another file. It was the ownership documents for the Audi Q7 Brittany drove. Another company perk arranged through a subsidiary. I logged into the vehicle tracking system. I could see the car was currently parked at the Drake Hotel Valet. I picked up my phone and called the recovery service I used for my logistics fleet. "This is Kowalski," I said, when the dispatcher answered. "Hey, Mr. Burney, what do you need?" "I have a vehicle recovery. A white Audi Q7. It is at the Drake Hotel. I have the GPS coordinates. I want it picked up tonight." "Tonight, boss, right now." "Do you have a spare key code?" "I do." "Repossess it. Take it to the impound lot on the south side, the one with the barbed wire, and leave the personal effects in the lobby of the hotel in a garbage bag." "You got it, boss." I hung up. I walked back into the kitchen. I looked at the empty spot on the fridge where Jason's face used to be. I felt a tear run down my cheek. I wiped it away angrily. I was done crying. They wanted to play games with family. They wanted to pretend they were royalty and I was the peasant. They wanted to introduce me to the world as a pig. Well, tomorrow morning, they were going to wake up in a world where the pig owned the mud, the farm, and the slaughterhouse. I went to my bedroom and opened the closet. I pushed aside the flannel shirts and the work pants. In the back, covered in plastic, was my Italian suit, the one I wore to board meetings, the one I wore when I fired incompetent executives. I took it out. I brushed it off. I hung it on the doorframe. Monday morning was coming. I had a board meeting at Sterling Industries. I had a son to evict. I had a daughter-in-law to bankrupt. And I had a grandchild to protect, even if it meant destroying the parents to do it. I turned off the lights in the house. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind rattle the windows. I didn't sleep. I just waited for the dawn. I sat in the cab of my Ford F-150, parked 3 houses down from 452 Elm Street. The Sunday morning sun was almost insulting in its brightness. It was the kind of morning that usually signaled pancakes, coffee, and the Sunday paper. It was the kind of morning that suburban dreams are made of. For the occupants of the Victorian house with the wraparound porch, however it was about to become the morning, their reality shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. I poured a cup of black coffee from my thermos and watched the steam rise against the windshield. I wasn't tired. I had not slept a wink, but my mind was as sharp as a razor. At exactly 9 a.m., a black SUV pulled up to the curb in front of the house. It wasn't a sleek luxury car. It was a government vehicle with the seal of the county sheriff on the door. 2 deputies stepped out. They weren't smiling. They adjusted their belts and walked up the front path with the heavy, purposeful stride of men who had a job to do and didn't care if you liked it. Behind them, a large unmarked box truck rumbled down the street and idled loudly, its air brakes hissing like a warning. This was the cleanup crew I had contracted through Blackwood. I rolled down my window just an inch to hear. The sheriff, a man named Miller, who I had known for years and who had no idea the property belonged to me, pounded on the heavy oak door. The sound echoed down the quiet street. Bam, bam, bam. It was the sound of judgment. It took a long time for the door to open. I imagined Jason and Brittany inside. They were probably in the living room, surrounded by piles of opened wedding envelopes, counting the cash and checks from the guests they had gouged the night before. They were probably calculating how much designer furniture they could buy, or perhaps planning a vacation to recover from the stress of being so terrible. Finally, the door swung open. Jason stood there. He was wearing silk pajama bottoms that I knew cost $200 because I had seen the charge on the bank statement I reviewed last night. He looked disheveled, his hair sticking up, his eyes squinting against the light. I saw him mouth the words, "What is going on?" Sheriff Miller didn't waste time with pleasantries. He handed Jason a thick packet of papers. I knew exactly what was in that packet. It was an emergency eviction order based on a breach of contract, immediate termination of lease, and a court order for the repossession of assets. Jason looked at the papers, then back at the sheriff. He laughed. I saw his shoulders shake. He thought it was a mistake. He thought it was a prank. He tried to close the door. Sheriff Miller put a heavy boot in the doorframe. He said something that made Jason freeze. Then the sheriff pointed to the lawn. He wasn't asking. He was telling. A moment later, Brittany appeared behind Jason. She was wrapped in a white robe that looked like it was made of clouds. She pushed past Jason and started screaming. I couldn't hear the exact words from this distance, but I knew the tone. It was the "Do you know who I am" tone. It was the screech of entitlement hitting a wall of authority. She pointed a finger in the sheriff's face. That was a mistake. The sheriff stepped into the foyer. The 2 deputies followed. The crew from the box truck jumped out. There were 6 of them. Big men with thick gloves and no patience. They marched up the steps like an invading army. I took a sip of coffee. The show was starting. For the next hour, I witnessed the systematic dismantling of a facade. It wasn't a gentle move. They weren't carefully wrapping crystal glasses in bubble wrap. This was an eviction. The movers brought things out in armloads and dumped them on the front lawn. First came the wedding gifts, shiny boxes, silver toasters, expensive blenders. They were piled haphazardly on the damp grass. Then came the furniture. The leather sofa I had subsidized, the oversized television, the dining chairs. It all came out, piece by piece, turning the manicured lawn into a chaotic yard sale. Brittany was pacing back and forth on the sidewalk, her phone pressed to her ear. She was frantic. She was waving her arms, pointing at the house, pointing at the deputies. She looked like a conductor whose orchestra was burning down. I knew who she was calling. She was calling her daddy. She was calling the powerful Richard Van Dort, the man who was supposed to fix everything. I pulled out my own phone and checked the time. It was 9:30. According to my intel, Richard Van Dort was currently sitting in his home office staring at a laptop screen that was showing him the early tremors of an earthquake. I had instructed Arthur Blackwood to leak a rumor to the industry blogs at 8 a.m. The rumor was simple: Sterling Industries under investigation for massive internal embezzlement. Stock price expected to plummet. Hostile takeover imminent. Richard wasn't answering his daughter's calls because he was busy trying to save his own skin. He was busy shredding documents. He was busy sweating through his silk pajamas. I watched Brittany scream into her phone, then pull it away and stare at the screen in disbelief. She dialed again and again. She stomped her foot like a toddler. She couldn't understand why the magic lifeline wasn't working. She had never lived a day in her life where a phone call didn't make the bad things go away. Welcome to the real world, sweetheart. Then came the clothes. The movers brought them out in garbage bags. Black, heavy-duty contractor bags. They dragged them down the stairs and tossed them onto the pile. I saw the flash of the Vera Wang wedding dress. It wasn't in a bag. One of the movers carried it out, draped over his arm like a dead swan, and laid it on top of a hedge. It looked ridiculous there, white tulle snagging on the branches, a symbol of a day that cost $85,000 and bought nothing but misery. Jason was sitting on the curb, his head in his hands. He wasn't fighting. He wasn't yelling. He was just watching it happen. He looked small. He looked defeated. He wasn't the man who had stood by while I was insulted. He was a boy whose toys were being taken away. A neighbor came out of the house next door. It was Mrs. Higgins, the head of the Homeowners Association. She was a woman who measured grass height with a ruler. She walked over to the property line, clutching her robe tight, staring at the mountain of debris growing on the lawn. She said something to Brittany. Brittany screamed at her. Mrs. Higgins took a step back, pulled out her phone and started taking pictures. I smiled. That would be a fine for bylaw violations. Another nail in the coffin. Then the tow truck arrived. It was a flatbed, large and loud. It backed into the driveway, its backup beeper cutting through the Sunday morning quiet like a countdown. Beep, beep, beep. The driver hopped out and hooked the chains onto the axle of the white Audi Q7. Brittany lost her mind. She ran toward the car. She threw herself against the driver's side door, clinging to the handle. She was screaming so loud I could hear her clearly now. "This is my car. You cannot take this. My father pays the lease. Get away from it." The sheriff stepped in. He gently but firmly peeled her off the car. She flailed, her robe falling open, her dignity evaporating into the morning air. She collapsed onto the grass, sobbing. She watched as the car, her symbol of status, her chariot, was winched up onto the flatbed. It tilted backward, looking helpless, looking like just a hunk of metal and plastic. The truck drove away, taking her freedom with it. I saw Jason stand up. He walked over to the sheriff. He was holding the eviction notice. He pointed to a line at the bottom of the page. He asked a question. The sheriff nodded and pointed down the street directly at my truck. Jason turned. He looked down the road. He saw the rusty Ford F-150. He saw the silhouette of a man in a baseball cap drinking coffee. He froze. I saw the realization hit him. It hit him harder than the eviction. He looked down at the paper in his hand again. He was looking at the signature of the property owner. BMK Properties. Bernard Michael Kowalski. He had lived in that house for 3 years. He had signed the rent checks every month, and he had never once looked at who actually owned the company he was paying. He had never been curious. He had just assumed it was some faceless corporation. He had assumed the world was just naturally generous to him. He started walking toward me. He was barefoot. He was walking on the asphalt in his silk pajamas. He looked like a ghost. Brittany saw him walking and scrambled to her feet. She followed him, wiping mascara from her cheeks. They reached my truck. Jason put his hand on the hood as if to steady himself. He looked through the windshield. His eyes were red hollow. "Dad," he whispered. The glass muffled his voice, but I read his lips. I rolled down the window. The smell of fresh coffee drifted out to meet the smell of their desperation. "You own the house?" Jason asked. His voice was trembling. "You are the landlord." I took a slow sip. "I am," I said. "BMK Properties. You never asked what the initials stood for. But why? Why are you doing this?" "We have nowhere to go. All our stuff is on the lawn. They took the car. Dad, this is insane. You have to stop them." I looked past him to Brittany. She was standing behind him, shivering. She wasn't screaming anymore. She looked terrified. She looked at me, the pig, the mechanic, and she saw something she didn't recognize. She saw the man who held the keys to her entire existence. "I am not doing anything, Jason," I said. "I am just correcting a mistake. I made the mistake of thinking I could buy you a good life. I made the mistake of thinking that if I cushioned the blow of the real world, you would grow up to be a strong man. But I just made you soft. And I made you ungrateful." Brittany stepped forward. Her voice was shaking. "Bernard, please. I am pregnant. You cannot throw a pregnant woman on the street. It is illegal. It is immoral." I looked at her stomach. I looked at her eyes. Illegal, no. I checked the statutes. Immoral, maybe. But you told me last night that I would never see that child. You told me I was a ghost. Ghosts don't pay mortgages, Brittany. Ghosts don't provide luxury SUVs. If you want to raise a Van Dort, go ask the Van Dorts for a house. She flinched. "My dad." "He isn't answering." "I know," I said. "He is having a very bad morning, and it is going to get worse." Jason gripped the window frame. "Dad, stop. Please. We are sorry." "Okay. We are sorry about the wedding. We are sorry about the jokes. Just tell them to put our stuff back inside. We will pay you back, I promise." "You will pay me back?" I asked. "With what money, Jason? The money I give you every month, the allowance, because I cut that off too. The bank transfer scheduled for tomorrow morning has been canceled." Jason looked like he was going to be sick. He swayed on his feet. You pay my allowance." I thought that was the settlement. From the insurance. There was no settlement, Jason. You never had a car accident. I made that up so you wouldn't feel like a charity case. I have been paying your bills for 3 years. I have been keeping you alive. And how did you repay me? You watched your wife call me a pig. You put me by the kitchen door. I started the engine of my truck. The rumble was loud, drowning out his whimpering. "Jason," I said, "you have a lot of work to do. It looks like it is going to rain later. You better get your stuff covered." I put the truck in gear. "Dad, wait. Where are we supposed to go?" I looked at him one last time. "I don't know, son. You are a smart boy. You have a college degree that I paid for. Figure it out." I rolled up the window. I drove away slowly. In the rearview mirror, I saw them standing in the middle of the street. 2 figures in expensive sleepwear, surrounded by a pile of garbage that used to be their life. They looked small. They looked lost. And for the first time in a long time, they looked real. I drove toward the city. The sun was high in the sky now. The day was just beginning. I had 24 hours until the board meeting at Sterling Industries. I had a CEO to fire. I had a company to save. And I had to stop at a suit store. The one I was wearing had a grease stain, and tomorrow I needed to look like the executioner. I felt a vibration in my pocket. It was a text message from Arthur Blackwood. Subject: Audit Update. Sir, you are going to want to see this. The hole in the Sterling Pension Fund isn't just 1.5 million. We found a secondary ledger. Richard Van Dort has leveraged the company's assets to secure personal loans totaling over $4 million, and he used the company's health insurance fund as collateral. I smiled. It was a cold, hard smile. $4 million. He hadn't just stolen from the company. He had stolen from the workers. He had stolen their health. He wasn't just a thief. He was a monster. And tomorrow I was going to cut his head off. I spent the rest of Sunday afternoon in my home office preparing for the kill. The dossier Arthur Blackwood had sent over was thick, heavy, and damning. It painted a picture of a man who was not just a thief, but a desperate gambler betting with other people's livelihoods. Richard Van Dort had built a life on quicksand, and I was about to turn on the hose. Outside, the sky was turning a bruised purple, threatening a storm that perfectly matched the mood. I had just finished reviewing the foreclosure documents on Richard's leased mansion when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't have saved, but the area code was from the affluent suburb where Richard rented his life. I let it ring 3 times before answering. I wanted him to sweat. I wanted him to imagine I wasn't there, that his lifeline was cut. When I finally slid my thumb across the screen, I didn't say hello. I just listened. The breathing on the other end was heavy, jagged, the sound of a man running out of air. Bernie. Is that you? It was Richard. His voice had lost the smooth, polished veneer of the night before. It sounded raw. There was a desperate edge to it, a tremor he was trying to hide with volume. In the background, I could hear the distinct sound of a woman crying. It sounded like Brittany. I am here, Richard, I said calmly. I assume you are calling to thank me for returning the $20 you dropped. Don't you play games with me, you son of a bitch, he shouted. The veneer cracked completely. You evicted them. You threw your own son and my pregnant daughter onto the street like garbage. Do you have any idea what kind of chaos you have caused? They are here, Bernie. They are in my living room. All their junk is in my foyer. My wife is having a panic attack. I took a sip of water. I imagined the scene. The rented mansion filled with the debris of Jason's life, the clash of 2 fake empires colliding. I didn't throw them out, Richard, I said. I simply terminated a business arrangement that was no longer profitable. I am sure a man of your financial stature understands the concept of cutting losses. And since you are the patriarch of the family now, since you are the one they look up to, I figured you would want them under your roof. You can provide for them, can't you? There was a silence. A long, heavy silence. I could almost hear the gears grinding in his head. He was trapped. He couldn't say no because that would admit he was broke. He couldn't say yes because he didn't have the money to support 2 households. He was cornered. Listen to me, Bernie, he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. We need to handle this like men, like fathers. This feud is getting out of hand. It is bad for business. It is bad for the family image. I leaned forward in my chair. What do you propose, Richard? I am willing to overlook your behavior at the wedding, he said quickly. I am willing to forget the insults. I am even willing to let Jason and Brittany stay here for a few days while they sort things out. But I have a situation, a temporary cash flow issue. Ah, there it was. The hook. What kind of situation, I asked. It is complex corporate finance, he said dismissively. You wouldn't understand the details. But with my promotion to CEO happening tomorrow, my assets are currently tied up in a blind trust. It is standard procedure for executive transitions. Everything is frozen for 48 hours. Lies. Pure, unadulterated lies. His assets weren't in a blind trust. They were non-existent. His bank accounts were empty because he had spent the last month trying to cover the holes in the pension fund before the auditors arrived. So you are saying you are broke, Richard? I am not broke, he snapped. I am illiquid. There is a difference. Look, I need a bridge loan, a personal guarantee, just to smooth things over until the board finalizes my compensation package on Tuesday. How much, I asked. $200,000, he said. The number came out too fast. He had been rehearsing it. $200,000, I repeated slowly. That is a lot of money for a mechanic, Richard. Why would I give you $200,000? Because if you don't, he hissed, his voice turning cold and nasty, I will destroy you. I waited. I let the threat hang in the air. How, Richard? How will you destroy me? I have friends, Bernie. Powerful friends. I know the zoning commissioner in your district. I know the health inspectors. I know the EPA regulators. I can make one phone call and have your little garage shut down for environmental violations. I can have them dig up your floor looking for oil leaks. I can tie you up in litigation for years. You will lose everything. Your shop, your house, that truck you love so much. I will bury you in paperwork and fines until you are begging for change on the street corner. He was bluffing. Or at least he thought he held a royal flush when he was holding a pair of twos. He didn't know that my legal team wrote the zoning laws he was threatening me with. He didn't know that my facilities were inspected by federal agencies that made the local health inspector look like a mall cop, but I needed him to believe he had the upper hand. I needed him to believe I was scared. Please, Richard, I said, injecting a tremor of fear into my voice. Don't do that. That shop is all I have. It is my retirement. Then sign the paper, he said, sensing blood. It is a simple guarantor agreement. You co-sign a loan for me, $200,000. I pay it back in a week with interest. You save your shop. You save your relationship with your son. You save your dignity. It is a win-win. I paused. I let the silence stretch out, letting him think I was weighing my survival against my pride. I don't have that kind of cash, liquid. I lied. You have assets, he countered. Your house, the land the shop sits on. Put them up as collateral. I have a lender ready to go. A private lender. He just needs a co-signer with unencumbered property. A private lender. That meant a loan shark. He was trying to get me to leverage my home to pay off a shark so he wouldn't get his legs broken. It was despicable. It was perfect. Okay, I whispered. Okay, Richard. You win. I will sign. Just leave my shop alone. Good choice, Bernie, he said, his voice dripping with triumph. Smart choice. Now I need you to meet me tomorrow morning. Where, I asked. At my office, he said. Sterling Industries headquarters. Downtown. The boardroom on the 45th floor. Come at 9 a.m. I want you to see where real business is done. I want you to see the view from the top before you crawl back to your hole. He wanted to humiliate me one last time. He wanted me to walk into his domain surrounded by glass and steel and bend the knee. He wanted to show off his power in front of his colleagues before he took my money. He was digging his own grave with a backhoe. I will be there, Richard, I said. 9 a.m. Do I need to bring anything? Just your ID and a pen, he said. And Bernie, wear a different suit. You are going to be in a corporate environment. Try not to look like you just changed the oil in a tractor. He laughed. It was a cruel, ugly sound. Then he hung up. I stared at the phone. The screen went black. I could see my own reflection in the glass. I wasn't smiling. I wasn't angry. I was cold. Ice cold. He had threatened my livelihood. He had tried to extort me. He was going to drag me into his web of debt and deceit to save himself. I stood up and walked to the window. It was fully dark now. The wind was picking up, rattling the storm shutters. I thought about Jason. He was in that house with Richard right now. He was probably listening to Richard brag about how he had brought the old man to heel. Jason was probably relieved. He probably thought his daddy-in-law had fixed everything. He probably thought the money train was back on track. They were all so blind. I went back to my desk. I opened the laptop again. I sent a secure message to Arthur Blackwood. Arthur, the meeting is set. 9 a.m. Monday. Sterling Industries boardroom. Richard thinks I am coming to co-sign a high-risk personal loan to cover his debts. He threatened to use regulatory leverage to shut down my business if I refused. Add extortion to the list of charges. And Arthur ensure the real board of directors is present. Tell them it is an emergency session regarding the acquisition. But do not tell them I am the buyer. Just tell them the new owner will be revealing himself and addressing the personnel issues personally. Also have the security team ready in the lobby. I don't want Richard making a scene when he is escorted out. I hit send. I sat there for a moment listening to the house settle. I looked at the suit hanging on my doorframe. It was a Brioni, navy blue, wool and silk. It cost $6,000. I had bought it in Milan 3 years ago when I acquired a European shipping line. It was tailored to hide the belly and emphasize the shoulders. It was a suit of armor. I walked over to it and ran my hand down the sleeve. Tomorrow I wouldn't be the mechanic. Tomorrow I wouldn't be the pig. Tomorrow I would be the butcher. I went into the bathroom and shaved. I took my time. I used a straight razor. I trimmed my mustache. I looked at the lines on my face. Every wrinkle was a battle scar. Every gray hair was a lesson learned. Richard Van Dort had spent his life pretending to be something he wasn't. I had spent my life hiding what I was. Tomorrow the masks would come off. I went to bed, but I set my alarm for 4 a.m. I wanted to be in the city before the sun came up. I wanted to be inside the building before Richard arrived. I wanted to be sitting in the big chair when he walked through the door. As I drifted off to sleep, I thought about the $20 bill in my pocket. I wondered if Richard would remember it when I handed it back to him. I wondered if he would understand in that final moment that the man he had called a peasant owned the castle he was standing in. The storm outside broke. Rain lashed against the roof. It was a cleansing rain. It was washing away the dirt of the weekend. Washing away the wedding. Washing away the lies. Tomorrow would be a new day. A clear day. A day of reckoning. The Chicago sun was biting and bright as I stepped out of the black town car in front of the Sterling Industries tower. It was a monolith of glass and steel that scraped the sky, a monument to corporate vanity that cast a long, cold shadow over the morning rush hour. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, just breathing in the city grit. For 40 years, I had looked at buildings like this from the bottom up, usually while fixing the delivery trucks that serviced their loading docks. Today, I was looking at it as the man who held the deed in his pocket. I adjusted my cufflinks. They were solid gold, heavy against my wrists, a gift from the board of directors of a German shipping conglomerate I had acquired 5 years ago. I smoothed the lapels of my navy Brioni suit. It fit me like a second skin, the Italian wool breathing, with me tailored to hide the years of diner food and emphasize the width of my shoulders. I caught my reflection in the revolving glass doors. I didn't see Bernie the mechanic. I didn't see the pig. I saw the butcher. Arthur Blackwood stepped out of the car behind me. He was flanked by 3 junior associates, all carrying thick leather briefcases that contained the autopsy report of Richard's career. 2 private security contractors, men with necks as thick as tree trunks and earpieces coiled like snakes behind their ears, fell into step beside us. We didn't walk toward the entrance. We marched. It was a formation designed to intimidate a wedge of power cutting through the morning crowd of coffee-clutching interns and weary salarymen. We pushed through the revolving doors and entered the lobby. It was a cavernous space of polished marble and abstract art that probably cost more than my entire neighborhood. The air smelled of expensive HVAC filters and fear. Rumors of the acquisition had clearly started to leak. You could feel the tension in the way the employees huddled in corners, whispering, their eyes darting toward the elevators. They knew a storm was coming. They just didn't know I was the lightning. I walked straight to the security desk. The receptionist was a woman named Brenda. I knew her. Not personally, but I knew her face. She had been at the wedding the night before. She was one of the guests seated at table 19, the outcast table near the kitchen. She had seen me get humiliated. She had seen me get thrown out. She looked up as our group approached, her expression bored and practiced. Then her eyes landed on me. She blinked. She squinted. And then her jaw went slack. She looked at the expensive suit. She looked at the shoes that cost $2,000. She looked at the cold, hard set of my jaw. Then she looked at the security detail behind me. I saw the recognition hit her like a physical slap. She started to stand up, her hand flying to her mouth. She was about to say something, maybe ask what the mechanic was doing here, or maybe apologize for the night before. I stopped her with a single look. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I just held a finger to my lips in a universal gesture of silence. Then I winked. It wasn't a friendly wink. It was a warning. It said, "Watch the show, but don't you dare ruin the surprise." She sat back down slowly, her face pale. She typed something furiously into her computer, but she didn't pick up the phone. She let us pass. She opened the security gates without asking for ID. She knew power when she saw it, even if she didn't understand why the groom's father was wearing it. We stepped into the executive elevator. The doors slid shut, sealing us in a capsule of silence. I watched the numbers climb. 10, 20, 30. My ears popped. With every floor, I felt the weight of the mechanic falling away. I thought about the grease under my fingernails that Richard had mocked. I thought about the crumpled $20 bill he had thrown at me. I reached into my pocket and touched it. It was my talisman, my reminder. The elevator chimed at the 45th floor. The doors opened onto a reception area that screamed excess. Persian rugs, mahogany paneling, a view of Lake Michigan that went on forever. It was quiet up here. The quiet of money. Richard Van Dort was waiting for me. He wasn't in the boardroom yet. He was pacing in the reception area, shouting into a cell phone. He looked terrible. His skin was gray and clammy, his eyes bloodshot and rimmed with dark circles. He was wearing a suit that looked expensive but wrinkled as if he had slept in it, or perhaps hadn't slept at all. He was sweating despite the chill of the air conditioning. He looked like a man holding onto a cliff edge by his fingernails. He spun around when the elevator chimed. He saw me. For a second, just a split second, I saw confusion in his eyes. He looked at the suit. He looked at the entourage. He looked at the way I stood, feet planted, hands loose at my sides. He saw a peer. He saw a predator. But then his arrogance kicked in. His brain rejected the visual data. He rewrote the narrative in real time to fit his delusion. He didn't see a billionaire. He saw a desperate mechanic who had spent his life savings on a rental tux to impress the big boss. Finally, Richard barked, snapping his phone shut and shoving it into his pocket. "You are late. I told you 9 a.m. sharp. Do you have any idea how tight my schedule is today?" He marched toward me, ignoring Blackwood, ignoring the security guards. He stopped inches from my face, bringing with him the smell of stale coffee and fear sweat. He looked me up and down, sneering. "Well, look at you," he said, a cruel laugh bubbling up from his throat. "You actually cleaned up. Where did you get the suit?" "Bernie Costume Shop. It fits a little tight in the shoulders, doesn't it?" Trying to look like a big shot for the bank, I didn't answer. I just looked at him. I looked at the man who had called me a pig. I looked at the man who had stolen millions. I looked at the man who had evicted my son. "I am here, Richard," I said. My voice was low, steady. It rumbled in my chest. "Yeah, I see that," he snapped. He turned his back on me, assuming I would follow like a dog. "Come on. The boardroom is this way. And listen to me, Bernie. When we go in there, you don't speak unless spoken to." You nod. "You sign where I tell you to sign. And you thank me for saving your miserable little life. Do you understand?" He didn't wait for an answer. He walked toward the double mahogany doors at the end of the hall. He walked with a swagger that was entirely unearned, a dead man walking who thought he was leading a parade. I looked at Arthur Blackwood. He raised an eyebrow, a silent question. Now I shook my head slightly. Not yet. I followed Richard. I walked 3 paces behind him. I let him open the heavy doors. I let him lead me into the lion's den. The boardroom was impressive. A table long enough to land a plane on, surrounded by 20 leather chairs. The walls were lined with portraits of past CEOs, stern white men who looked down with disapproval. At the far end of the room, sitting around the head of the table, were 6 people. I recognized them immediately from the dossiers. The board of directors. There was Sarah Jenkins, the chairwoman, a woman with eyes like flint. There was Marcus Thorne, the representative for the majority shareholders. There were the others, the power brokers who controlled the fate of Sterling Industries. They were sitting in silence, papers arranged neatly in front of them. They looked tense. They looked like they were waiting for an execution. Richard strutted into the room, spreading his arms wide. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," he announced, his voice booming with false confidence. "Thank you for convening on such short notice. I know there have been rumors, but I am here to assure you that the transition is under control. I have secured the necessary capital to bridge the divisional gap." He gestured wildly toward me, not even looking back. "In fact, I have brought a guarantor with me today. A private investor who is willing to leverage his personal assets to ensure our liquidity. He is a man of simple means, but he understands the value of my leadership." The board members didn't look at Richard. They looked past him. They looked at me. I saw Sarah Jenkins's eyes widen. She didn't look at me with the disdain Richard expected. She looked at me with recognition. She looked at the Brioni suit. She looked at Arthur Blackwood, standing silently at my shoulder with the thick files. She looked at the way I occupied the space. Richard didn't notice the silence. He didn't notice the shift in the room's gravity. He pulled out a chair, one of the side chairs, not a seat at the table, and pointed at it. "Sit there, Bernie," he commanded. "I have the papers right here. Just a standard lien on your property. We will get this signed, and then I can get back to running this company." I didn't sit. I walked past the chair. I walked past Richard. I could feel the heat coming off him, the desperate, frantic energy of a man trying to hold back the tide with a spoon. I walked to the head of the table, to the empty chair, at the very front, the chair reserved for the CEO. The chair Richard thought was his. Bernie, Richard hissed, grabbing my arm. "What the hell do you think you are doing? That is not your seat. Get back over there before you embarrass me." I stopped. I looked down at his hand on the sleeve of my $6,000 suit. I looked at it until he felt the weight of his mistake. He pulled his hand back as if he had touched a hot stove. I turned to face him. The room was deathly silent. The only sound was the hum of the hard drives in the server room next door and Richard's jagged breathing. I am not here to sign a loan, Richard, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it filled the room. It bounced off the mahogany and the glass. It carried the weight of 40 years of hard labor and 3 decades of corporate warfare. Richard blinked, his smile faltering. What? Of course you are. We talked about this. You are here to save your shop. I reached into my pocket. I pulled out the crumpled $20 bill he had thrown at me in the garage. I smoothed it out on the polished wood of the boardroom table. I am returning your gas money, I said. Then I reached into my inner jacket pocket. I pulled out a single thin envelope. It wasn't a loan document. It was a single sheet of paper with the letterhead of Kowalski Logistics embossed in silver at the top. And I am here to accept your resignation, I said. Richard stared at the paper. He stared at me. He looked at the board members, looking for an ally, looking for someone to laugh at the joke. But no one was laughing. Sarah Jenkins was looking down at her hands. Marcus Thorne was studying a file that Blackwood had just slid across the table. What is this? Richard whispered. Who are you? Arthur Blackwood stepped forward. He opened his briefcase with a click that sounded like a gunshot. Mr. Van Dort Blackwood said, his voice smooth and lethal. This is Mr. Bernard Kowalski. He is the founder and sole proprietor of Kowalski Logistics. And as of 6 a.m. this morning, he is the majority shareholder and new chairman of the board of Sterling Industries. The color drained from Richard's face so fast it looked like the blood had simply evaporated. He staggered back, hitting the edge of the table. No, he gasped. No. That is impossible. He is a mechanic. He is a pig. I walked around the table. I stood behind the CEO's chair. I placed my hands on the leather backrest. I am the pig, Richard, I said. And this is my farm. I sat down. Now, I said, looking at the man who was suddenly very small in his wrinkled tuxedo. Let's talk about the $1.5 million you stole from the pension fund. The silence in the boardroom was heavy, a physical weight that pressed down on the mahogany table and the chest of every person in the room. Richard Van Dort sat frozen in the chairman's seat, his hands gripping the leather armrests so tightly that his knuckles were white. He looked like a king who had just been told his castle was built on a sinkhole. He blinked rapidly, his brain struggling to bridge the gap between the reality he had constructed and the truth that was currently standing behind him. He looked at the single sheet of paper on the table, the letterhead of Kowalski Logistics, and then he looked up at me. His eyes were wide, glassy, and filled with a desperate, frantic denial. You are lying, Richard whispered. His voice was a dry rasp that barely carried across the table. This is a joke, a sick, twisted joke. You hired these people. You hired actors. You rented a suit. You are trying to scare me because I threatened your little shop. Well, it is not working, Bernie. It is not working. He looked around the table, his eyes darting from face to face, seeking an ally, seeking a nod of confirmation that this was indeed a farce. He looked at Sarah Jenkins, the chairwoman. Sarah, tell him. Tell this mechanic to get out of my office. Call security. Have him arrested for trespassing. Sarah Jenkins did not look at Richard. She looked at me. She picked up the file that Arthur Blackwood had placed in front of her. She opened it. The sound of the turning page was the only noise in the room. She scanned the first page, her expression unreadable. Then she looked up. Mr. Kowalski, she said, her voice cool and professional. The board acknowledges your acquisition of the controlling stake in Sterling Industries. We have verified the transaction with the SEC. The transfer of ownership was finalized at 6 a.m. this morning. We are ready to proceed with the agenda you have outlined. Richard flinched as if she had slapped him. What? He stammered. What did you say? Controlling stake, that is impossible. The stock hasn't moved. I would know. I monitor the markets. It was a private acquisition, Richard, I said. My voice was calm, the voice of a man explaining gravity to a child who had just jumped off a roof. I bought the debt. I bought the outstanding shares from the silent partners you ignored. I bought the bank that holds the note on this building. I didn't just buy the company. I bought the ground you are sitting on. Richard shook his head violently. No. No. You are a mechanic. You drive a rust bucket. My daughter called you a pig. You ate the chicken dinner at the back table. You cannot be a billionaire. Billionaires don't have grease under their fingernails. I leaned down. I put my face close to his. I could smell the sour tang of his sweat. I earned every dollar I have, Richard, I said. I built my company with sweat and grease. I know the value of $1 because I have had to work for it. You think money is magic. You think it appears because you deserve it. You think you can spend it because you have a title. But you forgot the most important rule of business. Never insult the man who signs the checks. Richard tried to stand up, but his legs seemed to fail him. He slumped back into the chair. Get out, he wheezed. Get out of my office. It is not your office, I said. And that is not your chair. I stepped back and nodded to Arthur Blackwood. Arthur stepped forward, opening the thick leather binder he had been holding. He placed it in the center of the table. It landed with a heavy thud, a sound of finality. Mr. Van Dort, Arthur said, his tone clinical and sharp. This is the preliminary forensic audit of the North American Sales Division for the fiscal years 2019 through present. It was conducted by an independent team of auditors over the last 72 hours. Richard stared at the binder. He looked like he wanted to vomit. We have identified serious irregularities, Arthur continued. Specifically, we found a series of wire transfers totaling $1.5 million from the Employee Pension Fund to a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands under the name RVD Consulting. Richard turned a shade of gray that I had never seen on a living human being. Those were legitimate consulting fees, he choked out. For market analysis. External contractors. Arthur flipped a page in the binder. We traced the ownership of RVD Consulting, he said. The sole beneficiary is listed as Richard Van Dort, and the funds were not used for market analysis. They were used to pay for a lease on a 12,000 square foot estate in Lake Forest. They were used to lease a fleet of luxury vehicles, including a white Audi Q7. They were used to pay off gambling debts at the Horseshoe Casino. And most recently, a significant portion was used to pay for a wedding at the Drake Hotel. The room gasped. It was a collective intake of breath from the board members. They looked at Richard with a mixture of horror and disgust. He hadn't just stolen corporate profits. He had stolen from the pension fund. He had stolen the retirement savings of the factory workers, the truck drivers, the secretaries. He had stolen from the people who actually did the work. That is a lie, Richard screamed. He slammed his hand on the table. That is a fabrication. You are framing me. You are planting evidence because you hate me. You are trying to ruin me because I am successful. I walked around the table slowly. I stopped behind Sarah Jenkins. I looked at the portrait of the founder on the wall. He looked stern. He looked honest. Richard, I said, keeping my back to him. Do you know what I do at Kowalski Logistics? He didn't answer. He was breathing hard, panting like a trapped animal. I fix things, I said. When a supply chain breaks, I fix it. When a company is bleeding, I cauterize the wound. And when I find a parasite, I cut it out. I turned around. I looked him in the eye. You are a parasite, Richard. You have been feeding on this company for 5 years. You have been draining the life out of it to fund your fantasy life. You wanted to play the big shot. You wanted to be the king, but you were just a thief in a tuxedo. I am not a thief, he shouted, standing up shakily. I am an executive. I made this company profitable. I generated revenue. I deserve that money. It was my bonus. I just took it early. You took it from the workers, I roared. My voice filled the room, bouncing off the glass walls. You took it from the men and women who stand on the assembly line for 10 hours a day. You took it from the people who trust this company to secure their future. You used their healthcare fund to secure personal loans. You gambled with their lives so you could drive a nice car and throw a party for your spoiled daughter. Richard shrank back. He looked small. He looked pathetic. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the terrified realization that the game was over. Arthur Blackwood pulled another document from his briefcase. He slid it across the polished table toward Richard. This is a formal termination of employment, Arthur said. Effective immediately. You are being fired for cause: gross misconduct, embezzlement, fraud, breach of fiduciary duty. You are stripped of all titles, all benefits, and all stock options. Richard looked at the paper. He didn't pick it up. He just stared at the words. Termination. For cause. You can't do this, he whispered. I am the CEO. The board promised me. I looked at Sarah Jenkins. Sarah looked at Richard. Her eyes were cold. Mr. Van Dort, the board never voted to appoint you as CEO. We were considering it. But in light of this information, and under the direction of our new chairman, Mr. Kowalski, the motion is withdrawn. You are fired. Please vacate the premises immediately. Richard looked around the room. He saw the faces of his colleagues, the people he had bragged to, the people he had bullied. He saw no sympathy. He saw only judgment. He looked at me. He looked at the mechanic he had tried to crush. Bernie, please, he begged. His voice broke. Please, let's talk about this. I can pay it back. I can work it off. Don't do this. I will lose everything. My house, my reputation. I will go to jail. I walked toward him. I walked until I was standing right in front of the chair he was still clinging to. The CEO's chair. You should have thought about that before you called me a pig, I said softly. You should have thought about that before you threatened my shop. You should have thought about that before you stole from your own people. I pointed to the door. Get out of my chair, Richard. He hesitated. For a second, I thought he was going to fight. I thought he was going to swing at me. But then his shoulders slumped. The energy left his body. He was empty. He let go of the armrests. He stepped away from the chair. He looked like he had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. He started to walk toward the door. His steps were heavy, shuffling. He didn't look at anyone. He just looked at the floor. Wait, I said. He stopped. He turned around, a flicker of hope in his eyes. Maybe he thought I was going to offer him mercy. Maybe he thought I was going to give him a severance package. I reached into my pocket. I pulled out the crumpled $20 bill. I walked over to him. I took his hand, his limp, clammy hand, and I pressed the bill into his palm. I closed his fingers around it. You dropped this, I said. You might need it for the bus. I hear the parking garage is expensive for non-employees. He looked at the money. He looked at me. A single tear rolled down his cheek. It wasn't a tear of remorse. It was a tear of self-pity. He turned and walked out the door. The silence in the room held for a long moment after he left. Then I turned back to the table. I looked at the empty chair at the head of the table. The black leather was still warm. I walked over to it. I sat down. It was comfortable. It was solid. It felt right. I looked at the board members. I looked at Arthur. I looked at the view of the city skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I saw the city that Richard had tried to conquer with lies. I saw the city that I had built with steel. Now I said, placing my hands on the table. My voice was calm, authoritative. The voice of the chairman. We have a lot of work to do. We have a pension fund to replenish. We have a company to rebuild, and we have a culture to change. I looked at Sarah Jenkins. First order of business, I said. I want a full audit of every executive expense account. If anyone else has been using company money for personal luxury, I want them gone by noon. We are going back to basics. We are a manufacturing company, not a country club. Sarah nodded. Yes, Mr. Chairman. And Arthur, I said. Yes, sir, call the district attorney. Tell him we are ready to file charges against Richard Van Dort. Tell him we have the evidence. Tell him we have the confession. And tell him I want him picked up before he leaves the building. I don't want him fleeing the jurisdiction. Arthur smiled. A shark's smile. Already done, sir. There are 2 detectives waiting in the lobby. They will meet him at the elevator. I nodded. Good. I leaned back in the chair. I thought about Jason. I thought about Brittany. I wondered if they were watching the news. I wondered if they had seen the stock ticker. I wondered if they knew that the roof over their heads, the roof Richard had promised them, was about to collapse. They had called me a pig. They had laughed at me. They had tried to erase me. But pigs are survivors. Pigs are smart. And when you wrestle with a pig, you both get dirty, but the pig likes it. I looked at the agenda on the table. Item 1, Introduction of New Leadership. I picked up a pen. It was a cheap plastic pen I had in my pocket. I clicked it. Let's get to work, I said. The board members opened their files. The meeting began. I was Bernard Kowalski, the butcher, the chairman, the pig, and I was just getting started. I did not stay in the boardroom to accept the congratulations of the directors. I did not stay to drink the expensive coffee or look at the view of the lake. I had one more piece of business to attend to, and it was taking place 45 floors down in the lobby. I signaled to Arthur Blackwood, and we took the private executive elevator down. It was a silent ride. The kind of silence you experience in a church or a morgue. The silence of a reckoning. When the elevator doors slid open, the scene in the lobby was chaotic. Richard Van Dort had made it as far as the security turnstiles. He was red-faced, shouting at the 2 detectives who were blocking his path. He was waving his arms, pointing at the ceiling, probably threatening to have their badges. But the detectives were not impressed. One of them, a tall man in a cheap suit that reminded me of my own from the wedding, spun Richard around and slammed him against the marble reception desk. I stopped near the elevator bank. I watched as the cold steel of the handcuffs clicked around Richard's wrists. I saw the moment his spirit broke. His shoulders collapsed. His head dropped. The loud, arrogant man who had thrown $20 at me in a garage was gone. In his place was a criminal facing 20 years for fraud. But the show was not over. Just as the detectives were reading Richard his rights, the revolving doors at the main entrance spun open. Jason and Brittany burst into the lobby. They looked like refugees from a high-fashion war zone. Jason was wearing wrinkled chinos and a polo shirt that had clearly been pulled out of a laundry pile. Brittany was wearing sweatpants and oversized sunglasses, her hair a bird's nest of tangles. They had obviously come hoping to catch Richard on his first day as CEO. They had come looking for a handout. They had come looking for a savior. Instead, they found their savior in cuffs. Daddy, Brittany screamed. Her voice echoed off the vaulted ceiling, sharp and shrill. She ran across the polished floor, her flip-flops slapping against the stone. "What are you doing to him? Get your hands off him! He is the CEO!" One of the detectives stepped between Brittany and her father. "Ma'am, step back. This man is under arrest for grand larceny and securities fraud." Brittany stopped dead. She pulled off her sunglasses. Her eyes were wide-rimmed with red. "Arrested," she whispered. "That is a lie. That is a mistake. Tell them, Daddy. Tell them who you are." Richard looked up. He looked at his daughter. He looked at Jason standing behind her. And then his eyes drifted past them, locking onto me. He did this, Richard croaked. He pointed his chin at me because his hands were bound behind his back. The mechanic. The pig. He set me up. He bought the company just to ruin me. Jason and Brittany turned slowly. They saw me standing by the elevators. They saw the Brioni suit. They saw the security detail. They saw Arthur Blackwood standing at my shoulder like a reaper. They looked at the receptionists, the security guards, the employees who had gathered to watch. Everyone was looking at me with respect, with fear. The reality of the situation crashed down on them. The house was gone. The car was gone. The open bar was gone. And now the rich father-in-law, the golden ticket, was going to prison. They looked at me, and for the first time they didn't see an ATM machine. They saw the owner of the bank. Brittany ran to me. She didn't run to scream. She didn't run to fight. She ran to beg. She threw herself at my feet, literally. She dropped to her knees on the cold marble floor, grabbing the hem of my trousers with desperate clawing hands. "Bernie," she sobbed. "Oh my God, Bernie. Please. You have to stop this. You have to help him. He is the grandfather of your grandchild. You can't let him go to jail. Think of the baby. Please think of the baby." I looked down at her. Yesterday she had called me a pig. Yesterday she had told me I would never see the child. Yesterday she had laughed while I was humiliated. Today she was on her knees, using the pregnancy as a shield, trying to manipulate the man she despised, because he was the only one left standing. I stepped back, pulling my pant leg from her grip. I brushed the fabric as if she had left a stain. "Get up, Brittany," I said. My voice was ice. "You are embarrassing yourself." She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. "But we are family," she wailed. "You said you wanted to be a grandfather. You can't destroy your family." I looked at Jason. He was standing a few feet away, staring at me with his mouth open. He looked terrified. He looked weak. "I wanted to be a grandfather," I said, "but you made it very clear last night. You said I was a ghost. You said the child would be a Van Dort. Well, look at the Van Dort legacy, Brittany. It is standing over there in handcuffs. That is the name your child will carry. A thief's name." She shook her head violently. No, I didn't mean it. I was stressed. I was hormonal. We can change the name. We can name him Bernard. Little Bernie. We will let you see him every day. Just please fix this. Buy the company. Drop the charges. Give us our house back." She was bargaining. She was selling the naming rights to her unborn child for a lease on a Victorian house. It was disgusting. It was transactional. It was exactly who she was. "It is too late," I said. "You don't get to negotiate with me anymore. You bet on the wrong horse. And now you have to walk home." The detectives began to drag Richard toward the exit. He didn't fight. He just hung his head. Brittany scrambled to her feet and ran after him, screaming for him to do something to fix it, to be the powerful man he promised he was. But he was just a criminal in a wrinkled suit. Jason didn't follow her. He stood there alone in the middle of the lobby. He looked at me. He walked over slowly, his hands in his pockets. "Dad," he said. His voice was small. "Okay. You made your point. You won. Richard is a crook. Brittany is difficult. I get it." He tried to smile. It was a pathetic, wheedling expression. "But I am your son, right? I mean, I am innocent in this. I didn't steal anything. I just went along with it. I am the victim here, too." I looked at him. I looked for a spine. I didn't find one. "You are not a victim, Jason," I said. "You are an accomplice. You stood by and watched. You enjoyed the champagne. You lived in the house I paid for. You drove the car I leased. You took the allowance I deposited. You were happy to live off the fat of the land, as long as you didn't have to acknowledge where it came from. Jason shifted his weight. Okay, fine. I was ungrateful. I am sorry. Really? But look, we have nowhere to live. My stuff is on the lawn. Brittany is hysterical. I need a loan. Just a small one. Until my next paycheck clears. He paused, gaining a little confidence. At least I still have my job, right? I am a good manager. I have a career. I can rebuild. I just need a bridge loan until payday. I looked at Arthur Blackwood. Arthur reached into his briefcase and pulled out a single white envelope. He handed it to me. Jason, I said. Who do you work for? He blinked, confused. I work for Midwest Logistics Solutions. I am the regional distribution manager. You know that. And who do you think owns Midwest Logistics Solutions? I asked. He frowned. I don't know. Some holding company. The Synergy Group or something. I tapped the envelope against my hand. Synergy Group is a wholly owned subsidiary of Kowalski Logistics, I said. I bought that company 4 years ago. I installed the management team. I created your position, Jason. I told them to hire you. I told them to pay you 20% above market rate. I told them to ignore the fact that you were late 3 times a week. Jason's face went white. No, he whispered. No, that is not true. I earned that job. You earned nothing, I said. I gave it to you, just like I gave you the house, just like I gave you the wedding. I built a world for you where you could pretend to be a success. But I am done building. I handed him the envelope. This is your termination notice, Jason. You are fired, effective immediately. Your company phone will be deactivated in 10 minutes. Your company credit card has already been canceled. Jason took the envelope. His hands were shaking so hard, he almost dropped it. Dad, you can't, he gasped. You can't fire me. I have a baby on the way. I have nothing. You have your hands, I said. You have a strong back. You are young. Go find a job. Go apply at a garage. Go learn how to change oil. Go learn what it feels like to work for $1 instead of waiting for it to appear in your account. But, he stammered. I leaned in close. You wanted to be a man, Jason. This is what being a man looks like. It looks like standing on your own 2 feet without your daddy holding you up. I turned away from him. I didn't look back. I walked toward the exit, flanked by my security and my lawyer. I heard him calling after me. Dad. Dad, please, I kept walking. I walked through the revolving doors and out into the sunlight. The air smelled of exhaust and city dust. It smelled like freedom. I got into the back of the town car. Arthur Blackwood got in beside me. Where to, sir? The driver asked. Take me to the airport, I said. I have a factory to inspect in Ohio. Arthur looked at me. Are you okay, Bernie? I looked out the window as we pulled away from the curb. I saw Jason standing on the sidewalk clutching his termination letter, watching the car drive away. He looked terrified. He looked like a child lost in a supermarket. But for the first time in his life, he was actually looking at the world as it was. I am fine, Arthur, I said. I just took out the trash. I closed my eyes. I didn't feel guilt. I didn't feel sadness. I felt lighter. The weight of the lies was gone. The parasite had been removed. The wound was cauterized. It would leave a scar, sure. But scars are just proof that you survived. Now I had work to do. It has been 6 months since I walked out of the lobby of Sterling Industries, leaving the wreckage of my son as false life behind me. I am sitting in a booth at Alice Diner on the south side of Chicago. I am eating a cheeseburger and drinking black coffee. It cost me $12, and it tastes better than the $85 plate of rubber chicken at the Drake Hotel ever could. I am not wearing the Brioni suit today. I am wearing flannel and jeans. I am back to being Bernie, but I am a Bernie who sleeps soundly at night. I did not keep the money I saved from cutting off Jason. I did not buy a yacht or a summer home in the Hamptons. Instead, I bought an old warehouse 3 blocks from my first garage. I gutted it. I filled it with the best lifts, the best tools, and the best diagnostic equipment money can buy. I put a sign out front. The Kowalski Trade Institute. Tuition is free. The only requirement is that you show up on time, you work hard, and you aren't afraid to get your hands dirty. I am building an army of mechanics who will know how to build the world, while the Richards of the world try to steal it. As for Richard Van Dort, he traded his tuxedo for an orange jumpsuit. The trial was short. The evidence was overwhelming. He took a plea deal to avoid the maximum sentence, but he will still be a guest of the state for the next 8 years. His leased mansion is empty. His reputation is ash. Jason and Brittany did not last the winter. When the money dried up, so did the love. It turns out their marriage was based on a credit limit, and when that hit zero, there was nothing left to hold them together. They divorced 3 months ago. I drove past a lumber yard last Tuesday. I saw a man in a safety vest sweeping sawdust near the loading dock. He looked thinner. He looked tired. He looked older. It was Jason. I didn't stop. I didn't wave. I just watched him for a moment. He was working. He was sweating. He was earning his paycheck. For the first time in his life, he was building character instead of debt. Maybe one day he will be ready to talk to me. Maybe one day he will understand that the broom in his hand is more valuable than the silver spoon he thought he deserved. Until then, I will let him sweep. Brittany is working at a cosmetics counter at the mall. I hear she has to smile at rich women all day and tell them how beautiful they are, hoping for a commission. It is a fitting purgatory for a woman who judged the world by its appearance. My grandson was born last week, a healthy baby boy. I have not met him yet. Brittany has custody, but I have set up a blind trust. It is not for a house or a car. It is for education, and it has conditions. He does not get a dime until he is 25 and can prove he has held a steady job for 5 years. I will not raise another parasite. I will watch him from afar. I will make sure he has opportunities, but I will never hand him the world on a platter. I finish my coffee and leave a $20 tip for the waitress who is working a double shift to pay her rent. That is where my money goes now, to the people who value it. I walk out to my truck. The sun is setting over the city. I think about the wedding toast. I think about being called a pig. I smile. Pigs are smart animals. They know the difference between slop and sustenance. They thought money bought class. They thought titles bought respect. They were wrong. Money is just a magnifying glass. If you are a good person, it allows you to do great things. If you are a rotten person, it just makes you a bigger monster. I start the engine. The rumble of the Ford is the only music I need. I am Bernard Kowalski. I am a mechanic, and I am the richest man in the world because I know exactly who I am. Did you enjoy this story? Let me know in the comments if you think Jason deserved a second chance or if I made the right call. If you want to hear more stories about justice being served cold, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching, and remember, never judge a book by its cover because you never know who is really signing the checks. See you in the next story. True wealth isn't measured by the balance in your bank account or the title on your business card. It's measured by the integrity of your character. Richard and Brittany had everything money could buy: the clothes, the cars, the connections. But they lacked the fundamental currency of respect and gratitude. They mistook kindness for weakness and silence for submission, never realizing that the strongest foundations are often the quietest. In the end, their greed didn't just cost them their lifestyle, it cost them their family. A legacy built on lies will always crumble, but a life built on honest work and loyalty is bulletproof. If this story reminded you that character always outlasts cash, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories where the underdog finally bites back.
다 생기는 거네. 잠깐만. 근데
왜냐면 진매 언니 팀이잖아.
한 명 어디 갔어?
진매 언니.
아니 여기.
발전에 뛰어다니던데 잠깐만.
일단 여기 나가자.
이게 너무 불안하다.
속 따가워. 잠깐만 봐야겠다. 여기 메인거리야 언니. 메인거리 아니야? 아닌가?
일단 가자. 입가에 묻은 불닭도 보라거든. 그냥 가자.
그럼 이거 위치만 찍고.
안녕히 계세요.
안녕하세요.
우리 보고 있을 거여가지고.